Okay, maintenance time. So on the last several flights, I could hear something catching back here and every time the prop spun. So I think it's, okay, so it's probably the clutch. That's what I'm guessing. There's a bearing out here on the outside and there's a bearing on the inside. It could be either one of those two. There's also a bearing on the pulley up here. Inside there where the prop shaft or this goes through right here. Okay, so listen to this, right? It's catching, it's catching right there, and sometimes it will actually pull the clutch around. Now watch, if I'd go 180, it does it right there too. So, right there. It's definitely catching. So if I do a big spin, so you can hear it. And that's what I was hearing on when I ran it last. So we're gonna pull it apart, see what we got. Okay, it is definitely not that pulley or that bearing. So that can come off. We are getting narrower and narrower here, I still think. Look, here it's catching. It's almost got to be those clutch shoes dragging back there. So now the fun part, we get to pull this thing off and then we'll see what we got. That's what that looks like, FYI. Okay, so I use the big puller. Now I'm just gonna use this small one here to show you the final steps. Make sure these things are between the gaps back there. There's 3 gaps around those clutch pads. If they're not, you're gonna pull those pads off and you're in a whole different problem. So I'm just slowly, you can see in the center there, that center should be sticking out from that bearing, but that's how far I've got it pulled out. So it's coming off super easy. I'm just turning it here. And it's just gonna give here at some point, right there. So I'll get it popped off, but I just wanted to show you that step. This is the second time I've had this bell off. So much easier this time. I don't know why. The first time, holy moly, that thing was on there. Okay, checked the bearing. This is the clutch bell that I've removed. It doesn't look bad at all. There is some rubbing on the edge here, and I think that's from the old clutch. But the bell itself looks fine. The bearings, there's a bearing here and a bearing on the inside. But use my old test here. See how that spins? That bearing's fine. So it's not the front bearing. Back bearing, it's always a little tighter, but it still spins just fine. There's no grinding, no binding. So let's look at the clutch. This is the old clutch, still mounted on the motor. Now, you can see here it's been rubbing, there and up there, and that's what left those marks in the bell. So I don't know if that's what's dragging, but another thing to look at is this gap. That should be completely flush, because what happens when this spins, these things go out, they each move out and engage the bell and thus move the prop. That spring holds them in tight when it's at idle, but there's a gap there. So that might be enough to let these go out and engage the bell, or it could be this part dragging. So I've ordered a new clutch, but in the meantime, this is my old clutch that I took off at 100 hours, and it is in perfect shape. The pads are even a little thicker than this one. It's got about 90 hours on it. But if you'll notice that gap right there, it's completely flush, as opposed to that, that's open. So I'm suspect of that. I'm suspect of the rub marks. This old clutch has no rub marks on it at 100 hours. So I think I'm gonna put this one back on because I just ordered a new one yesterday or last night. So it won't be here for a while. So this has to come off. She is off there. And you can see there's a lot of dust there. People have asked about the dust that their clutch creates. It does create dust, but this is a little bit much because I do keep it wiped down. But man, and those things are on there tight. I mean, it is hard. I had to use a monkey wrench to get it off. Okay, so anyway, that clutch is definitely the culprit. Here it is removed. And those wear marks, yeah, that's, I think the combination of the wear marks and the gaps, because look at it from an angle. It is definitely leaning forward. It is not flush or straight. And if you look on the back, look how big those gaps are. So that's what tells me it's definitely leaning forward. It's not closing all the way. It's closing down at an angle, rubbing the front of the bell, thus turning the prop. So that was it. Now, look at my old clutch. Again, this thing has 100 hours on it, but it's fine. No rubbing. The gaps are all flush on the back. Flush. And we look at the old one, not flush. So I think that was our culprit. I'll put that old one on. The new one's coming in. If I have to put it on eventually, then I will. But I think we're gonna be good to go. The new clutch is on, or the old new clutch. Bell housing has been put back on. And as you can see, she spins just fine. No problem. So I think that we're all good. I'll get her back together and we'll see how she does. That's everything put back together. Nice and perfect. So I'll put a new clutch on and nothing, no dragging. It's back to where it should be. So, good job. That's the end of that.